Good morning. This is Ron. It is Wednesday, April the 18th, and welcome to Storytime. Okay, so today is going to be another expansion of Storytime. I'm going to have four segments instead of the usual three. So what I'm going to add to it is a current events segment. So it'll be a current events segment. Then I will read from Ayn Rand, Philosophy: Who Needs It, and then I will read and critique a Rush Limbaugh, one of his show segments, and then wrap up with the New York City cab drivers joke book. So right now, the one thing that I wanted to touch on, current event wise, was the passing of Mrs. Bush, and very sad. I'm not a big Bush fan in terms of the politics of George H.W. or any of their sons, but they are um, they should be most of them should be Democrats. They have no business being Republicans, and absolutely no business calling themselves conservatives. But in any case, Barbara Bush was seemed like she was a very sweet lady, very straightforward, very unassuming. Didn't put on airs, or she's somebody that you feel would be very welcoming. That if you happen to be going by her house, and maybe even if you were lost, and she'd invite you in, and maybe give you a piece of pie and whatnot, and some refreshments before helping you figure out which way you need to go, that kind of thing. So, a very sweet lady. One of the things, though, that I wanted to discuss or critique was one of her statements in which she'd been interviewed a couple of times at least, and in one time she was talking about her children and what she expected of her children, and she said that one of the things she expected was for them to give back to the country because they were so very lucky to be born here. And this is a statement, the very lucky statement that I hear all the time. And I've heard it from my mother, I've heard it from my grandmother, and there's a lot of that goes around about being lucky. You hear it asked in interviews of athletes, for instance. Successful athletes that will be asked, "Do you feel lucky?" A lot of times they'll even volunteer the info. "Oh, I feel lucky. I'm lucky." And what I think a lot of people don't understand about the issue of luck as it applies to being successful in life is that luck is really, realistically, it's a marginal quality. It's a marginal enhancement, so to speak, of your life. What mainly you need is good judgment. You need to be diligent, and those kinds of things. So yes, we'll just concede for the time being the point that nobody gets to pick where they're born. So yes, you're lucky to be born in one particular place or another, or particularly in the United States of America. However, when one turns 18, when one becomes of the age of majority, one gets to choose where one lives. So if I choose when I turn 18 to continue to live in the United States of America, and that turns out to be a prosperous decision for me, then what I've demonstrated is not luck, but good judgment. And so, I want to put that to rest. This whole notion that life is so much about luck and getting lucky. The fact of the matter is that this is a benevolent universe. Success is to be expected. Okay, therefore, luck has little or nothing to do with the vast majority of the decisions that we make, and has little or nothing to do with our successes, because our success is to be expected. Now, the luck part of this is for those people that are on the left that want to um, emphasize a malevolent universe that and emphasize that failure is to be expected. And then the only way in that case to explain the successes that you see around you is one of three ways: either luck, cheating, or a combination of the two. So, and then with Mrs. Bush, she's not going to tell her kids that they need to give back because they've been cheating, because certainly she would not approve of that. So, of course, it's going to be you need to give back because you've been lucky. You've been so fortunate. And but you look at her kids and they have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and whatnot. They didn't get those by luck. They didn't get where they are by luck. They applied themselves and again made smart decisions. And so luck had very little, and luck has very little to do with the average person's life. It's about making good decisions, good decision making, essentially. So, and that's the end of segment one. When I come back, it is going to be time for Ayn Rand Philosophy Who Needs It, and it'll be chapter 15, which is going to be, let's see, it is Censorship, Local, and Express when we come back. Okay, so I'm back, and we're starting Chapter 15, Censorship, Local and Express, written in 1973 as part of Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand. I've been saying for many years that statism is winning by default, by the intellectual default of capitalism's alleged defenders. That freedom and capitalism have never had a firm philosophical base. That today's conservatives share all the fundamental premises of today's liberals, and thus have paved and are still paving the road to statism. I've also said repeatedly that the battle for freedom is primarily philosophical and cannot be won by any lesser means because philosophy rules human existence, including politics. And so I want to make a comment about this, that this is where I'm getting the idea that, and if, that I'm propounding that it isn't politics that shapes our culture, it's the other way around. As Ayn Rand has discovered and learned that philosophy shapes our culture and our culture shapes our politics, not the other way around. And that she's absolutely right. If you look at what goes on in this country politically, you find that it is the people on the right that are at fault for a lot of the problems that the people on the right complain about, for abortion, for the same-sex marriage, for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because the right will not go ahead and vigorously fight. They allow themselves to be tricked again and again and again, over and over and over again, and that's how we end up, like she said, by default, getting a lot of the laws and a lot of the cultural habits that we end up with. For instance, again, the way that we got public employee unions was simply through the use of an anti-concept called stakeholders, in which the left got that into the culture. They got into the news people and had the news people start using the term stakeholder instead of conflict of interest. Okay, so they drive conflict of interest out of the conversation, and they replace it with the word stakeholders. So that way it makes it seem as though having public employee unions is a perfectly normal and natural thing. And so once the culture goes ahead and disavows any type of pretends that there is no such thing as a conflict of interest, then shortly after that, you set the stage for political action to go ahead and create these public employee unions, which are, in fact, a conflict of interest. Now, the damage done isn't permanent. Anything in politics and in the law that can be created can be overturned, or a law can be vacated, neutralized in various ways, shapes, or form. Even the Constitution can be. You can have the Constitution be amended, and like they did with the amendment about prohibition. So they created the amendment for prohibition, then turned right around, created a new amendment that canceled prohibition. So anything that can be created can be uncreated. So, and today's, like she said, today's conservatives share all the fundamental premises of today's liberals. And a lot of that, I believe, has to do with the fact that a lot of today's conservatives are Christian, that the left has taken advantage of certain Christian doctrines and dogmas to try to secularize and socialize Christianity. And so what you end up with is there are a lot of churches that are really not churches at all. They're clubs. They're just socialist clubs. We have one in Pasadena, California. It's called All Saints Episcopal or Methodist Church, and in Pasadena, it's been a very activist church involved in politics. There's been a couple of times where they've been threatened with losing their tax exempt status because they have a tendency to, um, uh, sermonize not only about the Bible and about Christianity, but about proper politics. And so, what you have with the All Saints is basically a social club that is masquerading as a church, as a religious body, as a religious congregation. So they get all the advantages of uh, the religious. They don't have to pay the taxes, and they get the credibility. They borrow the credibility of the Christian church while at the same time promoting atheistic values, promoting worldly values. This is a trend or tendency that goes all the way to the Pope of the Catholic Church, where a lot of the things that the Pope talks about and previous popes have talked about are worldly issues. The whole idea of the church, the Christian church, any church, is to talk about issues that are that have to do with one's soul. That is what a church is for. It's for taking care of the souls of their parishioners, of their congregations, and those are the issues that the church needs to be concerned with, and that the Pope needs to be concerned with. Not getting involved in worldly issues, not getting down and getting involved in politics or policy issues, but staying out of that and being above it all, being a force for, at the end of the day, you ask yourself, what is it all about? What does it all mean? And religion is supposed to be here to answer that question, not to engage in political debates. But again, because of the left has taken advantage of Christian conservatives' Christian beliefs, then we have situations where the people that are supposed to be conservative end up being swayed to support socialist ideas, socialist laws and bills, and in so doing, then they end up again weakening the country, weakening the Constitution, and smuggling statism, as Ayn Rand puts it into the country, and we have again become more and more statist, even though very few people may actually be socialists or statists in this country, but yet we seem to end up with all kinds of laws that we didn't intend or didn't want. And the number one tactic or technique that the left uses that's important to know and understand is the technique of presuming change. And when you presume change, you put any of your opponents in the untenable position of having to prove a negative. So that it would basically go like this: why not change? That's the question the left almost always asks. Why not X? Why not change? Why not marijuana? right? Why not legalize marijuana? Why not same-sex marriage? Why not fill in the blank, whatever it is? Why not abortion? So, and the problem is that the right goes along with that question. They can't do it because you cannot prove a negative. If you're a conservative, if you're anti-socialist, you have to change that question. You have to say, I'm sorry, that's the wrong question. The right question is, why abortion? The right question is, why same-sex marriage? The right question is, why fill in the blank? Why change? Where is the obvious case for change, number one, and why should we change the way you want it changed? So, um, and if more conservatives, more people on the right would simply do that, and this is again, this is conversations that happen at ground level. This is the conversations that you're going to have with family members at the kitchen table. This is about conversations you have with your coworkers, with your friends, your relatives, your cousins, people that you see at the soccer fields, people that you meet in line at Vaughn's or Ralph's or some other type of grocery store, people that you meet in clubs. That's where it's really, really important. What's going on in Washington, D.C. is interesting, but there's not a lot you and I can do about it. There's a situation that's going on right now with the courts and the lawyer for Donald Trump, where his many of his documents were seized. Well, that's all fine and dandy and interesting, and maybe that'll make a difference in the way I vote in a couple of years or in the off year election coming up. But as far as anything else is concerned, it's really of little interest to me because what's of interest to me is the people that I interact with and deal with on a daily basis. Those are the people that I have to be able to convince of the rightness of my position, not Donald Trump. I can write Donald Trump a letter. More than likely, he's not going to get it. He's not going to read it. He's not going to respond. So I'm not going to be able to have a conversation with Donald Trump or Donald Trump's lawyer or Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh. If anybody has ever tried to get a hold of Rush Limbaugh, get on the phone with him, you know how difficult that is. And it doesn't matter anyways. What really matters is the people that you can influence in your life that you meet and see each and every day. So, anyways, going on with Chapter 15, Censorship, Local and Express. But philosophy is a science that deals with the broadest abstractions, and therefore many people do not know how to observe its influence in practice or how to grasp the process by which it affects the conditions of their daily life. A recent event, however, offers a clear, striking illustration of that process. It shows philosophy's influence in action and reveals the essence and the contradictions of both the conservative and the liberal ideologies. The event is the decision of the Supreme Court in 5 recent obscenity cases. In the Ayn Rand letter of November 20th, 1972, I expressed hope in regard to the 4 men appointed to the Supreme Court by President Nixon, even though it was too early to tell the exact nature of their views. But, I said, quote, if they live up to their enormous responsibility, we may forgive Richard Nixon a great many of his defaults. The Supreme Court is the last remnant of a philosophical influence in this country, unquote. Today, less than a year later, the evidence is sufficient to indicate there are no intellectual grounds left for forgiving Mr. Nixon. Since inconsistent premises lead to inconsistent actions, it is not impossible that the present Supreme Court may make some liberating decisions. For instance, the court made a great contribution to justice and to the protection of individual rights when it legalized abortion. I'm not in agreement with all of the reasons given in that decision, but I am in enthusiastic agreement with the result, i.e., with the recognition of a woman's right to her own body. But the court's decision in regards to obscenity takes an opposite stand. It denies a man's or woman's right to the exercise of his own mind by establishing the legal and intellectual base of censorship. And again, I wanted to interject something real quick while I'm thinking about it, and in which she talks about the recognition of a woman's right to her own body. And again, we get down to proving a negative on that particular issue. and it's kind of a bit of a canard because nobody is suggesting that a woman doesn't have the right to her own body. Nobody is saying that a woman is enslaved to society, to men in general, or to a specific man in particular, say her husband, where she has to go to her husband and ask permission to do because if she didn't have the right to her own body, she would literally have to go ask somebody, whether it's a government official or her husband, to be able to do anything, to go to the bathroom, to go to church, to go to the doctor, to drive. Now, there's many places in the world where that's the case, such as Saudi Arabia, where a woman basically does not have the right to her own body at all. She must get permission from a male relative before she can do literally anything. But that's not so in the United States. Just because a woman is prohibited from having an abortion doesn't mean that a woman doesn't have the right to the use and command of her own body. So, before proceeding to discuss that decision, I want to state, for the record, my own view of what is called hardcore pornography. I regard it as unspeakably disgusting. I have not read any of the books nor seen any of the current movies belonging to that category, and I do not intend ever to read or see them. The descriptions provided in legal cases, as well as the modern touches in softcore productions, are sufficient grounds on which to form an opinion. The reason of my opinion is the opposite of the usual one. I do not regard sex as evil. I regard it as good, as one of the most important aspects of human life, too important to be made subject of public anatomical display. But the issue here is not one's view of sex. The issue is freedom of speech and of the press, i.e., the right to hold any view and to express it. It is not very inspiring to fight for the freedom of the purveyors of pornography or their customers. But in the transition to statism, every infringement of human rights has begun with the suppression of a given right's least attractive practitioners. In this case, the disgusting nature of the offenders makes it a good test of one's loyalty to a principle. And real quick, that reminds me of Skokie, Illinois, and this was going back several decades in which the ACLU went ahead and defended because there was an American Nazi party or white people's party that wanted to do a parade or some type of march in Skokie, Illinois, and the city was going to deny the group the permits with which to go ahead and have their rally, and the ACLU came to their defense and sued them. And this is back in the day when the ACLU stood on principle instead of politics. Today, the ACLU is only going to defend those people that are left and express left-wing viewpoints. If you're conservative, forget the ACLU. They're not going to come to your rescue. They're not going to help you out in any way, shape, or form. But back in the day, they were all concerned about free speech. That was their primary concern. And whenever, wherever there was a situation in which there was somebody's free speech rights were being violated, the ACLU was there to take up the case, file a lawsuit, and they usually ended up winning, as they did in Skokie, Illinois. But the point is that they took on a case from the standpoint of, like what Ayn Rand was saying in here, the suppression of a given right's least attractive practitioners. And there can be what else can be least or less attractive than an American Nazi party? But the ACLU stood up for them, realizing that if they allow the rights of even this small group of people to be violated, that we get into a slippery slope. Then it will be another group's rights that will be violated, and on and on and on, until we get to the point where nobody is going to have the right to speak. Everybody's going to have to go to the government to ask permission to speak, and the First Amendment will be effectively or de facto neutralized. So, and that's going to be, I'm going to leave it right there for the Chapter 15, Censorship, Local, and Express. And when I come back, I will be reading and critiquing a little bit of Rush Limbaugh's show from yesterday. Okay, and I'm back. And the name of this particular segment of Rush's show is called Conflicted Incestuous Washington Hypocrites Dare to Accuse Hannity of a Conflict of Interest. And this is from April 17th. Rush, let me tell you the truth about something. Every one of these drive-by media hypocrites that are going on and on and on about conflict of interest regarding Sean Hannity would be the first people to accept a close-up and personal relationship with Barack Obama any day of the week, Hillary Clinton any day of the week, and they wouldn't have any problem covering it up. They would all brag about it. They all strive. They all want to impress Obama. They wanted to be in Obama's inner circle. What the hell does it mean when you write that? When I saw the crease in his slacks, I knew this guy was going to be a great president. What does that really mean? That was David Brooks, a so-called conservative. Now, all of a sudden, everybody knows that Sean Hannity and Donald Trump are good friends, and they go way back. And everybody knows that Sean Hannity believes in Donald Trump, and there's not a single thing in the world wrong with that. And everybody knows that Sean Hannity is eager for Donald Trump to succeed, just like over half of the country is. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sean Hannity's not withheld anything from anybody about anything that he's doing here. Sean Hannity is more honest, 3 times as honest as anybody you can pluck from the drive-by media doing their jobs each and every day. Each and every day they're engaging in deceit to try to hide from you the close ties that they all have with each other. Washington, D.C. is an incestuous revolving door, and Sean Hannity is not part of the drive-by media, Washington, D.C. establishment. So let's see. Um, one more paragraph. Sean Hannity is an advocate for Donald Trump, and in this day and age, advocates for Donald Trump are no different than Trump in that they have to be destroyed. They have to be targeted. They have to be held up for ridicule because it's all about getting Trump. Every bit of this is about getting Donald Trump. The Washington establishment cannot allow for Donald Trump to succeed. He's an outsider. So again, and this Rush is wrong. It's a reasonable guess, but it's a guess and it's wrong. The left wants what it's always wanted, which is socialist revolution leading to socialist paradise. And the way you get to a revolution is by agitating, by creating friction, social friction. And what you can do is you come out and make statements against Sean Hannity in the hopes that one of 2 things happens. That your supporters who don't like Hannity rise up and start the revolution, or that Hannity and his supporters overreact, rise up, and start the revolution inadvertently. Because at this particular point, the left doesn't care how the revolution starts as long as it gets started. Make no mistake about it, the left is impatient. The left has been promised a revolution for over 150 years, and they want it. They want their damn revolution, and they want it now. You look at people like George Soros, who is, 70, 80 years old? He could pass away at any day. He doesn't want to die without having seen at least the start of this Marxist socialist revolution. So that's what it's all about in terms of Trump and Hannity. They don't particularly care about Trump one way or another, or Hannity one way or another. They're both individuals. Individuals don't count for anything in particular. It's about movements, and they're trying to use Hannity and use Donald Trump to further their movements. Let's see, what else did... the other thing I wanted to say is that always the mistake that Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh are making is in regards to the importance of what goes on in Washington, D.C., or in this particular case, it's New York, because there's the court case, but it's part of Washington, D.C. Mueller, he's went ahead and raided Trump's lawyer's office in New York, and they're having some court case about it in New York, but it still basically comes back to Washington, D.C. The real issue here, and what you need to learn when you're looking at things that are going on in Washington, Sacramento, or other places, is how is this going to play with my political opponents, my political adversaries? How are my neighbors, my relatives, my so-called friends acquaintances and coworkers going to be able to use this information to my disadvantage? I would see that they would, come up to you and say, "Hey, did you hear about um, did you hear about Sean Hannity?" They might start with something just as innocuous as that, hoping that you have already heard the information and are feeling defensive. Because then you're going to get, once you get defensive, then you launch into some big defense of Sean Hannity. Oh, but you don't understand, blah, 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 blah. And what you end up trying to do is prove a negative, which is exactly their main game. Prove the negative. And also is what they're doing here when they're making, and they don't really make accusations about Sean Hannity and conflict of interest. They suggest, they hint that maybe there's some kind of something nefarious going on here because Sean Hannity's name got mentioned in this particular court case. So it's an arbitrary claim, and it deserves no, it deserves to be ignored, as Ayn Rand has discovered and proposed. And so, in this particular case, if you get anybody that comes to you and wants to quiz you about or make statements about Sean Hannity and his relationship to Donald Trump or to the lawyer in question, the best thing you can do is ask questions like, "Did you hear about Sean Hannity?" No, as a matter of fact, I hadn't. What about him? Put them on the spot, put them in the position of having to prove a positive, prove that something nefarious occurred. They don't want to do that. The left likes to exercise power. They like to operate with impunity. That meaning without having to fear, without any fear of consequences. So they want to be able to manipulate you psychologically. Come up to you and say little phrases, little words, and then watch you bubble and fizz like an Alka-Seltzer tablet in a glass of water. Watch you overreact. Watch you get angry, because that again gives them the sense of power. One of the ways to shut them down and deny them that power is simply to follow the basic rules of debate. Make the presumption for the status quo. Don't honor any arbitrary claims or questions for that matter. Insist that the person that's making the claims prove their claims, show evidence for it. Once they show evidence, then, or supposed evidence, then you can go ahead and then you have something you can refute. But with an arbitrary claim, there's nothing to refute. So you end up arguing in circles. You end up making yourself look bad, look like the very thing that you're being accused of, or in Sean Hannity's case, making Sean Hannity look like somebody with a conflict of interest, because you're going to be frustrated and desperate to try to disprove something that has never been proven or even shown any evidence for. So, when we come back, it is going to be joke time. Okay, so I'm back, and I'm going to be reading now some jokes from the New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book by Jim Peach. Did you hear about the new lesbian sneakers? They were called Dikeys. However, they had to be recalled because the tongues weren't long enough. A young woman is going to marry a Greek man. The night before the wedding, her mother takes her aside. "Now look," the mother tells her daughter, "Greeks are a little strange. If he ever tells you to turn over, I want you to get out of bed, pack your clothes, and come home to me." So the couple gets married, and everything's fine for the first 2 years. Then one night, while they're in bed, the man says to the woman, "Sweetheart, roll over now." She gets very upset, gets out of bed, puts her clothes on, and starts packing her suitcase. As she's ready to leave, the confused man says, "Darling, wait a minute, what's the matter?" Holding back her tears, she says, "My mother told me that you Greek men are strange, and that if you ever told me to roll over, I was to get my clothes on, leave you, and go home to her." "But honey," says the man, "don't you want children?" What do you call a cow with no legs? Ground beef. Two Polish guys go on a fishing trip. They rent all the equipment, the reels, the rods, the wading suits, the rowboat, the car, and even a cabin in the Maine woods. They spend a fortune. Then they drive 8 hours to Maine. The first day they go fishing, but they don't catch anything. The same thing happens on the second day and on the third day. It goes on like this until finally, on the last day of their vacation, one of the men catches a fish. As they're driving home, they're really depressed. One guy turns to the other guy and says, "Do you realize that this one lousy fish we caught cost us $1,500?" The other man says, "Wow, it's a good thing we didn't catch any more." Why won't a barracuda ever attack a Jewish American princess? Professional courtesy. Two New Yorkers are in Las Vegas gambling and they win $200,000. One man says to the other, "Come on, let's go out and paint the town." "You know," says his friend, "I think this money is New York money. This dough is earmarked for the Big Apple, and I think we should go back there to spend it." "You're right," says the first man. "Let's go out to the airport right now and catch the first plane back." "Forget the airport," says the friend. "Let's just take a limo." "Forget the limo," says the first man, and then he yells, "Taxi!" A cab pulls up in front of the two men. The friend opens the door and is about to get in when the first man says to him, "Say, where in New York do you live?" 59th Street, says the friend. The first man then says, "In that case, I'd better get in first because I'm getting out at 43rd. What goes in hard and pink and comes out soft and mushy? Bubblegum. All right, that's it for today. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll have another episode tomorrow on Thursday the 19th. And until then, thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day.